Hey y'all, and welcome back to another episode of There's Danger Here. I'm Leilani, and this is an afternoon episode, so it's going to come out late today. All right, let's get started, shall we? In April of 1954, two students from the University of Colorado were hiking along Boulder Creek when they stumbled upon the deceased body of a young woman. This case would be a long-standing Jane Doe. She had light brown to strawberry blonde hair, weighed approximately 100 to 110 pounds, was 5'3", and she was around 17 to 20 years old. She was completely nude and partially frozen. There was little evidence on her body, though her injuries would give clues to what had happened to her. After the investigation got started, it ended without resolution. After all, she had no identification, and nobody knew who she was. She ended up labeled as a Jane Doe, specifically Jane Doe UFC 333, and she was buried in the local cemetery. Her headstone even read simply that she was Jane Doe. But this isn't the end of her case. After decades, in comes a woman, Miss Silvia Pettam. Silvia researches and writes about Boulder history. She said once or twice a year, Boulder holds an event called, quote-unquote, Meet the Spirits. During the event, local actors would come out and act as one of the deceased people in that local cemetery. On October 5th, 1996, there was a Meet the Spirits in which Silvia attended and acted herself as one of the deceased. Another young girl, approximately 20 years old herself, played Jane Doe. According to the society that puts on the event, Jane Doe was always included. She was a young woman who was killed in 1954. They remind the world that she had been beaten, nude, and left in the woods. The only guess about her was that, again, she was around this 20 years of age. That year, in 1996, the actor that portrayed Jane stated, quote, "Please give me back my name. No one knows who I am or how I came to die. Battered, beaten, and naked on the rocky edge of Boulder Creek. My murderer, whoever he was brutal and vicious. I was too young to die. Can someone tell me who I am and return my remains to my family?" End quote. Silvia said she heard this and stated it struck her. She needed to know who was Jane Doe. How Silvia was a writer for the history column for the local paper in Boulder, she had access to the daily camera archives. Silvia went in search of any information on this woman and found that the archives had an entire drawer of murder files. The back file was labeled You, and in it found a bunch of clippings that started Silvia on her journey of finding Jane Doe's identity. As Silvia was looking at the coroner's inquest, she saw written on it that Freeburn L. James was the pathologist in the case of the Boulder woman. Naturally, she Googled him. Finding only one person with that name, she decided she was going to call him, and she got a hold of him, asking him if he was the pathologist that had worked on this specific case, to which he replied he had always wondered what happened to her, and he even kept her report, which he dutifully faxed a copy to Silvia. The autopsy report stated that the coroner was George Howe and was completed on April 8, 1954. It also reported Jane Doe had an appendectomy scar. If you don't know, this means that her appendix had been removed. That's just an aside. She had multiple fractures, including the left maxilla, left mandible, left clavicle, left first through fourth ribs, and left humerus. She had a hematoma on the top of the scalp and a fracture on the right side of the skull, along with multiple contusions and abrasions. From there, Silvia went and spoke with the police involved in her investigation, starting with Detective Steve Amesworth in October of 2003. Detective Amesworth stated that when he spoke with Silvia, she really had all of her information ready to go. that she had all the documentation, dates, and times of the homicide. She had put together a file that police didn't even have. He was already working as a cold case detective, and so he took on this Jane Doe. First, going back to the crime scene to get a better understanding of just what had happened. Then he stated he knew he'd have to request an exhumation of Jane Doe in order to get her DNA and potentially help identify her and get her to her family. Detective Amesworth brought it to Joe Pelly, the sheriff, as he needed to sign off on it. Joe had never done an exhumation before and said that he, upon realizing the cost, was reluctant to complete this exhumation. At that, Silvia stated she offered to raise the money herself. Silvia and Pele held a press conference, speaking about Jane Doe and trying to get the community backing. Then Silvia called Mary Riley McNellan, the Columbia Cemetery preservation manager at the time, and told Mary that they wanted to exhume Jane Doe. Detective Amesworth thought the press conference was just way too small. It was too isolated. And so he went and contacted America's Most Wanted and presented the 50-year-old cold case, believing it needed national attention to get the case solved. By June 8th, 2004, the money was finally raised, and Silvia also managed to enlist the help of the Vidocq Society members. This is a forensic specialist team who volunteer to help solve cold case murders, and they donated their time and expertise to many cases, including this Jane Doe. Beth Buchholz, the county medical examiner at the time, was also on site to round out the group. Unfortunately, during the excavation, Beth realized that the coffin had disintegrated, and as a result, she basically had to remove the remains as you would expect at an archaeological site. Eventually, they were able to bring her skeletonized remains out and use her molars to extract DNA. As the forensic pathologist looked over Jane Doe, he stated that the injuries look like, quote, bumper injuries, end quote, particularly as they were all on one side of the body. Again, like I said, all of her injuries were located pretty much on the left side. After her skull was put back together, a facial reconstruction was complete and unveiled on June 14th, 2005. She was also posted on the National Jane Doe Network, as well as Silvia's own Jane Doe website. From there, Silvia and other researchers, such as Karen Nichols, a volunteer researcher out of Michigan, began looking at runaways from the area at the time, crossing out those who had resurfaced later through documents such as marriage licenses and things like that. They also looked into tips from the online sites. One of the biggest barriers was finding that it was really easy at the time for people to just up and change their identity. In August of 2005, they found that a woman named Catherine Dyer had disappeared in Denver in March of 1954, and she was the same approximate age. While her husband had long since passed away, Sylvia looked up marriage licenses and was able to find that her husband had married several times and one of the women was still alive. She, of course, once again, gave her a call. That woman had photos that her husband had left behind, and in the pile, Sylvia found Catherine. They superimposed the image of Catherine to the Jane Doe, and the images were eerily similar, leading investigators to believe they may have identified their Jane Doe. As they are looking into this, investigators also try to determine who may have murdered her, and the name Harvey Glattman came to play, a serial killer who tied and bound their victims. In looking at some of Jane Doe's reports, it appeared that she may have a ligature mark on her wrists. Unfortunately, by this time, Glattman had long since been executed, and there was no definitive proof that she was a victim. I'm sure I'll talk about him at some point in depth, so I'll leave it at that, other than he did at one point kidnap a woman out of Boulder, tied her up, and kept her for a night, sexually assaulting her. An assault that he did do prison time for, and after prison was in Boulder at the time of this disappearance. But then, another blow. After submitting the information on the Jane Doe network and Sylvia's website about the possibility of Jane Doe being Catherine, an email comes through. It's from Queensland, Australia, where two ladies had been taking care of a woman named Barbara. When they were moving her into a nursing home, they were going through her papers and found divorce papers of a one Catherine Dyer to a James Dyer. After Googling the name Catherine, they came across the Jane Doe network. Nobody knew she was a missing person in Australia. She was simply Barbara Thompson. Apparently, Catherine left her marriage, moved to Hawaii, and then down to Australia, where she took the name Barbara and had been living her life ever since. In 2008, it was decided, since there were no more leads, it was time to reintern Jane Doe. After that, in 2009, Michelle Casper from Madison, Wisconsin, emailed Silvia. She believed Jane Doe may be her aunt, Dot. Dorothy Gay Howard was born to Roy and Eunice Howard. She was the oldest of three with little sisters Marlene or Deanie and Barbara, and she went missing in 1953. When Dot was about 15, in 1942, the family had moved from Casa Grande, Arizona to Phoenix, where Roy owned and worked on a ranch. Dot was the most rebellious, but everyone said she was in charge of the show. She had run away multiple times in the past, and at one point she even lied about her age to get married to a 19-year-old military man, a marriage that ended in an annulment within 6 months. When the marriage dissolved, Dot ran away to Portland, Oregon, where her father, Roy, again went and picked her up and brought her home. In 1953, Dot was around 17 years old, almost 18. Around that time, she ran off again. The family found out later that she had gotten married and believed that she had ran away when she got divorce papers, which they found out through a local newspaper. She had been married this time to an older man named Kenneth Kirkman. Still, family all says she didn't want to live on the farm, and later family reported believing Dot may have gone to Colorado to visit an aunt there, though she never ended up making it. But family knew for certain in March of 1954 that Dot was missing. And they knew for certain because she had promised to take one of her sisters to the movies and then was a no-show. They called the house in which she had been working as a nanny and were told she no longer was employed there. The family did report her missing, but the search was pretty local at the time from what I could find. And again, this isn't the time that information gets mass disseminated like it does now. Michelle reported that after learning about Dot as a teenager, she started calling all the Dorothy Gays and Dorothy Howards she could find. But they were all certain that it wasn't them. None of them had run away. Eventually, in her search and telling people about this, a friend told Michelle about the Doe network. When looking at this network, Michelle started a search for Arizona, but she found nothing. But when she expanded her search, she found Jane Doe UFC 333, realizing the physical description was very close to Dot. She also saw the information about the appendectomy scar. Michelle asked her Aunt Deanie, Dot's younger sister again, if Dot had any surgeries, and Deanie reported immediately that Dot had her appendix removed. After searching for more information, Michelle found Silvia. She got her email, and that's how it started. After talking, Silvia brought the information to Detectives Ainsworth. Ainsworth found out that there was a living sibling, and so he sent the Arkansas State Police out to her to get a DNA sample. That was compared to the sample from the molars recovered from their Jane Doe. Weeks later, and the results were in. The lab director called Detective Ainsworth and told him he'd better sit down. They had a match. Jane Doe UFC 333 was officially Dorothy Gay Howard. While they can't definitively say that Howard was murdered by Harvey, Detective Ainsworth found many similarities. In the transcript from his talks with police later on, they ask if the women were alive or dead from Colorado, and after asking if they were alive, Harvey stated, quote, "unless they were hit by a car," end quote. Detective Ainsworth found a restored make and model of the vehicle Harvey was known to drive. They matched the injuries to Dot almost exactly. He had previously made a victim strip down, again matching how Dot was found. Still, with all of this, while it is likely he could be the murderer, it cannot be confirmed, meaning at this time her case is still open. On May 22nd of that year, Dot's surviving sister, Marlene Ashman, traveled to Boulder to say goodbye to her sister. She decided, after all the care the community had given her, to leave her in Boulder. Deanie said, quote, "At least the people were kind enough to love her and give her some dignity," end quote. And that is the open case of Jane Doe UFC 333, now known as Dot Howard. To all those out there listening, be careful. It's a dangerous world we live in.